Welcome to Cozy Jury. Tonight's story will test you. It's messy, it's complicated, and by the end, you will decide who's right and who's wrong. But before we begin, if you value what we're building here, hit like. Subscribe if you want more of this, but only if this is your kind of content. I'd rather earn it than beg for it. Drop a comment. Where are you right now and what time is it? I love knowing who's out there deliberating with us. Now get comfortable. You're not just listening, you're the jury. The fire's burning, the case is open. Let's begin. Rebecca found the earring in the laundry basket. It wasn't hers. She'd been folding James's work shirts on a Tuesday afternoon in their Seattle home, the rain drumming against the windows like it always did in March, when her fingers brushed against something small and cold, tucked into the pocket of his grey dress shirt. A single pearl earring. Delicate, expensive, the kind with a tiny diamond chip at the base. She stood there in the laundry room, the warm smell of detergent surrounding her, holding this piece of evidence that didn't belong in her world. Her first thought, the one that came before the panic, before the nausea, was simple and stupid. Maybe it fell off a client during a meeting. Maybe someone at his office lost it and he picked it up to return it. Her brain was doing what brains do when they encounter information that threatens to destroy everything. It was scrambling for the innocent explanation, the reasonable story, the version of reality where her life wasn't about to implode. But then she looked at it closer. Really looked at it. The pearl was cream-colored with a faint pink undertone. And she knew that pearl. She'd seen it 100 times, catching the light at family dinners, bobbing next to a familiar face across the Thanksgiving table, glinting in her peripheral vision during movie nights on the couch. Emma wore those earrings. Her sister wore those earrings. Emma had bought them 2 years ago during a girls' trip they'd taken to Portland, splurging on them at a boutique near Powell's Books. Rebecca had been there when Emma tried them on, had nodded approvingly when Emma asked if they were worth the $200. Rebecca remembered because she'd joked that Emma should get them, since she, Rebecca, would just lose one within a week. Emma never took those earrings off. She wore them constantly, like a signature. They were her favorite pair. Rebecca's hand started trembling. The earring felt heavier suddenly, like it was made of lead instead of pearl and gold. She turned it over in her palm, examining the clasp, the post, looking for some detail that would prove she was wrong, that these weren't Emma's, that there was some other woman in Seattle who owned identical pearl earrings with diamond chips. But she knew. The knowing settled into her stomach like a stone dropping into dark water, sending ripples of recognition through her entire body. This was Emma's, which meant Emma had been close enough to James in some context, in some location, for this earring to end up in his shirt pocket, not his jacket, his shirt, the one he wore against his skin, the one he wore under his suit during work hours, the one he'd been wearing last Thursday when he said he had to stay late at the office for a presentation. The laundry room felt smaller suddenly. The walls seemed to press in. Rebecca became aware of her breathing, too fast, too shallow. She could hear her heartbeat in her ears, a dull thudding that drowned out the rain. Her legs felt weak, like they might give out, so she sat down hard on the tile floor, her back against the washing machine, still holding the earring. She thought about last Thursday. James had texted her around 6 to say he'd be late, that he needed to finish prep work for Friday's client meeting. She'd responded with a supportive message, told him she'd save him dinner. She'd spent the evening watching Netflix, texting with her friend Lauren about weekend plans, scrolling through Instagram without really seeing it. Normal evening, boring evening. Except somewhere in the city, her husband had been with her sister. Doing what? The question opened up a chasm of horrible possibilities. Rebecca's mind jumped to the week before. Sunday dinner at their house. Emma and her husband Marcus had come over. They'd grilled salmon, opened a bottle of wine, played board games until almost midnight. Rebecca tried to remember if Emma had been wearing the pearl earrings that night. She pictured her sister's face across the dining table, laughing at one of Marcus's dad jokes, her dark hair swept behind her ears. Yes, she'd been wearing them. Rebecca was sure of it. So sometime between Sunday and Thursday, Emma had lost one, and it had ended up with James in his pocket, like he'd picked it up from somewhere, like maybe a hotel room floor, or the back seat of his car, or his office after hours. The scenarios played out like a horror film Rebecca couldn't turn off. Emma's body against James's body. Emma's hands in James's hair. Emma's voice saying things that were meant only for Rebecca to hear. Emma's mouth on James's mouth. Her sister, her baby sister, who she'd helped raise after their mom died. Her sister, who'd been her maid of honor. Her sister, who called her every Wednesday just to chat. That sister. Rebecca didn't know how long she sat there. Long enough for her legs to go numb. Long enough for the rain to intensify into a downpour that made the windows rattle. Long enough for James's shirt to slip off the pile and land in a wrinkled heap on the floor. She stared at the earring in her palm, this tiny, beautiful thing that had just destroyed her entire world, and tried to figure out what she was supposed to do now. Confront James the second he walked through the door. Call Emma and demand an explanation, pretend she never found it and quietly fall apart. Every option felt impossible. Every option felt like stepping off a cliff into nothing. But this earring wasn't the end. It was the trigger for a war. What Rebecca didn't know yet, sitting on that laundry room floor, was that this betrayal went deeper than just physical infidelity, that it stretched back further than she could imagine, that it involved lies, stacked on secrets that had been growing like mold behind the walls of her perfect life. Before this story ends, there will be locked doors and public exposure. There will be a choice that half of you will call justice, and the other half will call revenge. Rebecca will do something that makes some people cheer and other people recoil. She'll cross a line that can't be uncrossed, and you're going to have to decide if she was right to do it. Was Rebecca justified in what comes next? Hold that thought. Let's go back to the beginning, to the very first red flag that everyone missed, to the foundation of this perfect life that was actually rotting from the inside. Because to render a fair verdict, you can't just look at the crime, you have to understand the motive. And the motive started years ago in the small decisions and tiny compromises that Rebecca thought were normal, that everyone told her were normal, but that were actually the first cracks in a dam that was always going to break. You need to see how they got here. You need to see what Rebecca saw and what she didn't see and what she chose not to see. You need to see the before so you can judge the after. So let's rewind to when Rebecca thought she had it all. Let's go back to when she believed in the fairy tale, because that's where the real story begins. Rebecca had met James 7 years ago at a networking event in downtown Seattle, one of those after-work mixers where young professionals stand around drinking mediocre wine and pretending to be interested in each other's elevator pitches. She'd been 27, 2 years into her marketing career at a mid-sized agency, still figuring out if this was really what she wanted to do with her life or if she should go back to school for something more meaningful. She'd almost skipped the event. It was raining, as usual, and she'd had a long day dealing with a difficult client who kept changing their mind about the campaign direction. But her colleague had convinced her to go, promising it would be worth it, that you never knew who you might meet. Rebecca had rolled her eyes but agreed, changing into a nicer blouse and refreshing her makeup in the office bathroom before heading over to the hotel conference room where the mixer was being held. She'd noticed James immediately. Not because he was the most handsome man in the room, though he was attractive in that clean-cut, professional way that Seattle tech guys often were, but because he was standing alone near the windows, looking out at the city lights, seeming genuinely uninterested in networking. He had this expression on his face like he was solving a complex problem in his head, his brows slightly furrowed, his fingers drumming against his wine glass. Rebecca found herself drawn to that aloofness. Everyone else was working the room with aggressive enthusiasm, but this guy looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. She appreciated the honesty of it. She'd approached him with a simple opening. Just walked up and said, "You look like you're planning an escape route." He'd turned to her, startled, then smiled. A real smile, not the practiced networking smile everyone else was wearing. "Is it that obvious?" he'd asked. They talked for an hour, ignoring everyone else. He was a financial analyst at a venture capital firm, working long hours evaluating startups and managing investment portfolios. He'd grown up in Portland, studied economics at the University of Washington, liked hiking and craft beer and old movies. Normal stuff. Safe stuff. Rebecca found him easy to talk to, funny, in a dry way, smart, without being pretentious. When he asked for her number at the end of the night, she'd given it without hesitation. Their first date had been at a Thai restaurant in Capitol Hill. James showed up 15 minutes early and had already secured a table by the window. He asked questions about her work, seemed genuinely interested in her thoughts on brand strategy and consumer behavior. He told her about his goals, how he wanted to start his own investment firm someday, how he was saving aggressively and learning everything he could. Rebecca liked his ambition. She liked that he had plans, that he wasn't just drifting through his 20s like so many people she knew. They discovered they both loved the same obscure indie films, both had complicated relationships with their families, both wanted kids eventually, but not yet. The conversation flowed without effort. When he walked her to her car, he kissed her goodnight, and it felt right. Not explosive or earth-shattering, but right, comfortable, like coming home. They fell into a relationship quickly. Within 3 months, they were spending every weekend together. Within 6 months, they were talking about moving in together. Rebecca introduced him to Emma, who approved immediately, saying James seemed stable and kind, that she could tell he really cared about Rebecca. Emma had just started dating Marcus at the time, and they'd do double dates, the 4 of them at breweries or Sunday brunches. Rebecca feeling like her life was finally clicking into place. She had a career she was good at, a sister she adored, and a boyfriend who seemed like he could be the one. It felt like she'd figured out the formula for happiness. James proposed on a hiking trip to Mount Rainier. They'd been together for 2 years. He got down on one knee at a scenic overlook, the mountains sprawling behind him, tourists taking photos and clapping. The ring was beautiful, a simple, solitaire diamond that caught the light. Rebecca said yes without hesitation. She called Emma from the parking lot, crying happy tears, Emma shrieking with excitement on the other end. They planned a wedding for the following summer, small ceremony, just family and close friends, at a venue overlooking Puget Sound. Emma was maid of honor. Marcus was one of James's groomsmen. Everything was perfect. Rebecca kept thinking that even though the word made her cringe a little, perfect, like a magazine spread, like a movie ending, she had found her person. The first year of marriage was an adjustment, but they navigated it well. They bought a house in the suburbs, a 3-bedroom craftsman with a big backyard and a view of the mountains on clear days. Rebecca loved that house. She spent weekends painting walls and hanging art and planting a garden. James threw himself into his work, putting in long hours, building his reputation, making the connections he'd need to eventually start his own firm. Rebecca understood. She was busy too, climbing the ranks at her agency, taking on bigger clients, traveling occasionally for work. They had a routine. Coffee together in the mornings, quick texts throughout the day, take-out dinners most weeknights because they were both too tired to cook, sex once or twice a week, predictable but satisfying, weekends filled with errands and social obligations and trying to see friends before everyone got too busy with kids. Emma and Marcus had gotten married 6 months after Rebecca and James. Marcus was a high school English teacher, warm and patient, exactly the kind of guy Emma needed after years of dating volatile artist types. The four of them remained close. They celebrated holidays together, traded off hosting dinners, texted in a group chat about random things. Rebecca loved having Emma nearby. Their mum had died when Rebecca was 22 and Emma was 20, a sudden aneurysm that had left both sisters reeling. They'd clung to each other through the grief, Rebecca stepping into a quasi-maternal role despite being only 2 years older. Having Emma close, seeing her happy with Marcus, felt like they'd both made it through the darkness and found light on the other side. But there were small things in those early years that Rebecca noticed but dismissed. Little moments that didn't quite fit, but that she rationalized away because the alternative was unthinkable. Like the time she came home early from a work trip to find James and Emma sitting very close together on the couch, their body language shifting abruptly when she walked in, both of them overly cheerful in their greetings. Emma had been dropping off a birthday gift, she'd explained. They'd just been chatting, nothing weird about that. Or the time Rebecca's phone died and she borrowed James's to look something up, only to see a text from Emma that said, "Miss you already," with a heart emoji, sent at 10 p.m. the night before. When she asked about it, James had shrugged and said Emma must have meant it for Marcus, that she'd probably texted the wrong person. Rebecca had accepted that, or the way James's face would light up in a specific way when Emma walked into a room, a way it didn't quite light up for Rebecca anymore. She told herself that was normal. Relationships evolved. The spark mellowed into something steadier. That's what people said. That's what therapists in magazines said. She was being insecure, looking for problems where there weren't any. There was also the night of Rebecca's 30th birthday party. They'd rented out a private room at a restaurant, invited about 40 people. Rebecca had been drinking wine, feeling good, making rounds and thanking everyone for coming. At one point, she'd stepped outside for air, and when she came back in, she'd seen James and Emma in the corner, their heads bent together in what looked like an intense conversation. Emma's hand was on James's arm. They both looked serious, almost upset. When Rebecca approached, they'd immediately smiled, switched to talking about something innocuous. Rebecca had asked if everything was okay. Of course, they'd both said. Just discussing Marcus's job stress. Nothing to worry about. Rebecca had let it go. It was her birthday. She was happy. Why ruin it with paranoid questions? Looking back now, holding that earring, Rebecca could see the pattern. But at the time, each incident existed in isolation, easily explained, quickly forgotten. She'd been so invested in the narrative of her perfect life that she'd ignored every piece of evidence that contradicted it. She'd wanted the fairy tale so badly that she'd written off anything that didn't fit. And James and Emma had known that about her. They'd known she wouldn't look too closely, wouldn't ask too many questions, wouldn't believe the truth even if it was right in front of her. They'd counted on her trust. They'd weaponized her love. The baseline belief Rebecca had held was simple. She was safe. Her marriage was solid. Her sister loved her. The people closest to her would never hurt her. She'd built her entire life on that foundation. She went to work every day, and came home every night believing that her world was stable, that the structures holding her up were sound. Even when there were tremors, little earthquakes of doubt, she'd reinforced the foundation instead of questioning it. She'd done what everyone does in relationships. She'd chosen trust over suspicion. She'd chosen optimism over fear. She'd chosen to believe the best about the people she loved. And now, sitting on the laundry room floor, she understood that the foundation had never been solid. It had been rotting since the beginning, maybe since before the beginning. Maybe James and Emma had started whatever this was before Rebecca and James even got married. Maybe their entire marriage had been built on a lie. Everything seemed fine, normal until it wasn't, until a single pearl earring with a diamond chip tumbled out of a shirt pocket and ripped away the veil. Until Rebecca could no longer pretend, until the truth became unavoidable.
And that's when everything changed. That's when the woman sitting on the laundry room floor stopped being the Rebecca who trusted and started becoming the Rebecca who would do what she did. The Rebecca you're going to have to judge. The earring sat on Rebecca's nightstand for 3 days. She put it there Tuesday afternoon after finding it,
placing it carefully on the wooden surface like it was evidence in a trial, which she supposed it was. She couldn't bring herself to confront James yet, couldn't bring herself to call Emma. Instead, she moved through those days in a fog, smiling when she was supposed to smile, speaking when she was supposed to speak, going through the motions of her life while her brain worked overtime trying to process what she knew. James didn't notice anything was wrong. Or if he did, he didn't say anything. He came home Wednesday evening and kissed her on the cheek like always, asked about her day like always, scrolled through his phone while eating the pasta she'd made like always. Thursday morning, he left for work at 7:30, coffee mug in hand, calling out that he'd be home by 6. Rebecca watched him from the bedroom window, watched his car pull out of the driveway, watched him disappear down the tree-lined street, and wondered how many times he'd left this house to go be with Emma. How many lies had he told? How many nights had he claimed to be working late when really he was in a hotel room with her sister? On Thursday afternoon, Rebecca left work early claiming a headache. She drove to Emma's neighborhood, a subdivision about 15 minutes away, where Emma and Marcus had bought their starter home 3 years ago. She parked down the street, far enough away that she wouldn't be immediately visible from Emma's house, but close enough to watch. She felt ridiculous doing this, like a character in a bad TV drama, but she needed to know, needed to see. Marcus's car wasn't in the driveway, which made sense because he'd be at school until at least 3:30. Emma's car was there, her silver Honda parked in its usual spot. Rebecca sat in her car for 2 hours, waiting for something, though she wasn't sure what. Waiting for James's car to pull up, maybe. Waiting for proof that would be more concrete than a lost earring. Nothing happened. Emma didn't leave the house. No one came to visit. At 4:15, Rebecca gave up and drove home, feeling stupid and paranoid. Maybe she was wrong. Maybe the earring had gotten there some innocent way. Maybe Emma had been in James's car for some legitimate reason, and it had fallen off, ended up in his shirt somehow. Maybe Rebecca was creating a crisis out of nothing, letting her imagination run wild, damaging her relationships with suspicion and doubt. She wanted to believe that. God, she wanted to believe that. But Friday morning, something happened that made believing impossible. Rebecca woke up early before James's alarm went off. She lay in bed listening to him breathe, watching the grey dawn light creep through the curtains, feeling the weight of the secret knowledge pressing down on her chest. James's phone buzzed on his nightstand, once, twice, 3 times in quick succession. He didn't stir. Rebecca carefully reached over him and picked up the phone. She'd never gone through his phone before, had never felt the need, but now her fingers were unlocking it before she could second-guess herself. She knew his passcode. He'd given it to her years ago. It was her birthday. The texts were from Emma, 3 in a row, sent at 6:07 a.m. The first said, "Can't stop thinking about Tuesday." The second said, "When can I see you again?" The third was just a red heart emoji. Rebecca stared at the screen, reading the messages over and over, her breath catching in her throat. Tuesday. The day she'd found the earring, the day Emma had presumably been with James. Whatever had happened between them that day, Emma couldn't stop thinking about it. Emma wanted to see him again. Emma was sending heart emojis at 6 in the morning to Rebecca's husband. Rebecca's hands were shaking so hard she almost dropped the phone. She quickly locked it and placed it back on the nightstand, then slid out of bed as quietly as possible. She went to the bathroom and closed the door and sat on the edge of the tub, her mind racing. This was real. This was actually happening. It wasn't a misunderstanding or a paranoid fantasy. James and Emma were having an affair. Her husband and her sister. The two people she trusted most in the world. They were betraying her together in the most intimate way possible. The room spun. Rebecca gripped the edge of the tub, feeling like she might throw up. How long had this been going on? Months? Years? Had they been sleeping together while Rebecca planned her wedding? While she stood at the altar, promising forever? While she lay next to James every night, believing she was safe? When James woke up 20 minutes later, Rebecca was back in bed, eyes closed, pretending to sleep. She listened to him get ready for work, the sounds of the shower running, the electric toothbrush buzzing, the closet door opening and closing. He kissed her forehead before leaving. "Love you," he said softly. Rebecca kept her eyes closed, didn't respond. The moment she heard his car leave, she grabbed her phone and called in sick to work. Then she texted Emma. "Can you come over today? Need to talk. Important." Emma responded within minutes. "Of course. Is everything okay?" Rebecca typed back, "Just need my sister. Can you be here by 10? Emma sent a heart emoji and "See you then." Rebecca spent the next 2 hours preparing. Not preparing what she'd say, but preparing mentally for what was about to happen. She made coffee. She sat at the kitchen table. She looked at the pearl earring she'd brought downstairs and set next to her coffee mug. She thought about all the times Emma had sat at this table with her, drinking wine and talking about life and laughing about stupid things. She thought about their childhood, sharing a bedroom, braiding each other's hair, staying up late telling secrets. She thought about their mother's funeral, how Emma had held Rebecca's hand through the entire service, both of them crying so hard they could barely stand. She thought about Emma's wedding, how Rebecca had helped her get dressed, had fixed her veil, had told her she'd never seen her look so beautiful. All of those memories felt like lies now. Or not lies exactly, but contaminated. Poisoned by what Emma had done, what she was doing. Rebecca didn't know if she'd ever be able to look at those memories the same way again. Emma arrived at 10:03. She knocked twice and then let herself in with her spare key, calling out, "It's me," as she always did. Rebecca heard her sister's footsteps coming down the hallway, heard her voice getting closer, and felt her entire body tense. Emma walked into the kitchen smiling, looking concerned and caring, and so completely normal that Rebecca almost doubted herself again. Almost. Emma was wearing jeans and an oversized sweater, her dark hair in a ponytail, no makeup, looking like the Emma who'd been Rebecca's best friend for 32 years. "Hey," Emma said, pulling out a chair. "What's going on? You sounded weird in your text." Rebecca didn't say anything. She just picked up the earring and slid it across the table. Emma looked down at it. Her face changed. For just a second, maybe half a second, Rebecca saw it. The recognition, the panic, the oh fuck realization. Then Emma's expression smoothed out, became puzzled, became innocent. "Where did you find that?" she asked. "I've been looking for it everywhere. I thought I lost it at the gym. I found it in James's shirt pocket," Rebecca said. Her voice sounded strange to her own ears. Calm, too calm, like she was discussing the weather. Emma's eyes widened. "What? That's so weird. Maybe it fell off when we were moving that bookshelf last week. Remember, Marcus asked James to help him move it from our living room? I was there helping too. It must have fallen off and somehow ended up in his pocket." The lie was smooth, plausible. If Rebecca hadn't seen the text messages, she might have believed it. But she had seen them. "Can't stop thinking about Tuesday," Emma had written. Tuesday, when James had come home late, when the earring had ended up in his pocket. Tuesday, when something had happened between them that Emma couldn't stop thinking about. "Emma," Rebecca said quietly. "Stop." Something flickered across Emma's face. Fear, maybe, or defiance. "Stop what? I'm just telling you what happened." Rebecca pulled out her phone, opened the screenshots she'd taken of the text messages before James woke up, and turned the screen toward Emma. "Then explain these." Emma looked at the phone. The color drained from her face. She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. No sound came out. Rebecca watched her sister's brain scramble for an explanation, watched her try to formulate some story that would make this okay, that would preserve the lie. But there was no story. The texts were right there, clear, damning, undeniable. Emma's eyes filled with tears. "Rebecca," she started. "It's not. I can't. It's complicated." "Complicated," Rebecca repeated. The word felt like ash in her mouth. "My husband and my sister are fucking each other and it's complicated. That's what you're going with?" Emma flinched at the vulgarity. "It's not like that. It's not. We never meant for this to happen. It just..." She trailed off, realizing there was no good way to finish that sentence. Rebecca felt something crack inside her. Not break, not yet, but crack, like ice over deep water. "How long?" she asked. Emma didn't answer. "How long, Emma? Months? Years? Was it before I married him? Were you sleeping with my fiancé?" "No," Emma said quickly, too quickly. "No, it started after you were married." Rebecca laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "Oh, well, that makes it so much better. Thank you for that boundary, Emma. Really thoughtful of you." Emma was crying now, tears streaming down her face. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I never wanted to hurt you. I love you. You're my sister." Rebecca felt rage building in her chest, hot and dangerous. "Don't you dare say you love me. Don't you dare. If you loved me, you wouldn't have done this. If you loved me, you would have told James to fuck off the first time he came on to you. If you loved me, you would have protected my marriage instead of destroying it." "He came on to me," Emma said, almost defensively. As if that mattered. As if the order of events changed the betrayal. Rebecca stared at her sister, this person she thought she knew, and realized she was looking at a stranger. Or maybe she'd always been a stranger. Maybe Rebecca had just been too naive to see it. "Get out," Rebecca said. Emma blinked. "What?" Rebecca stood up, her chair scraping against the floor. "Get out of my house. Get out right now before I do something we'll both regret. Emma stood too, reaching out like she wanted to touch Rebecca's arm.
Please, let me explain. Let me tell you everything. Maybe we can. Rebecca stepped back, away from her sister's reach. There is no we anymore. There is no explaining this away. You destroyed us. You and James. So get the fuck out of my house and don't come back. Emma left. She grabbed her purse and walked out, still crying, still trying to say something that might fix this.
Rebecca stood in the kitchen, listening to the front door close, listening to Emma's car start and drive away. And then she sat back down at the table and stared at the earring and the screenshots on her phone and tried to figure out what she was supposed to do now. This was real. This was her life now. Her husband was cheating on her with her sister, and there was no unknowing it, no going back to the blissful ignorance of 4 days ago. Everything had changed, everything was ruined, and Rebecca had to decide what came next. She could leave James, she could pack a bag and go stay with a friend and file for divorce and try to rebuild her life from the rubble. That's what most people would do, probably. That's what the internet would tell her to do if she posted this story on Reddit. But the thought of just walking away felt wrong, incomplete, like letting them win. They'd had their affair, their fun, their secret thrill, and Rebecca would just quietly exit so they could continue. No consequences beyond a divorce lawyer and some awkward family dinners. That didn't feel like justice. That felt like surrender. Or she could stay and try to work through it. Marriage counseling, therapy, long conversations about why it happened and how to rebuild trust. She'd read articles about couples who survived affairs, who came out stronger on the other side, but those articles were about affairs with strangers, with co-workers, with random people from dating apps, not affairs with siblings, not betrayals that cut through every relationship in your life simultaneously. How do you rebuild trust when the two people who destroyed it are both supposed to be your family? How do you sit across from your sister at Christmas dinner knowing what her mouth has done to your husband's body? The thought made Rebecca's stomach turn. There was a third option forming in her mind, dark and seductive. Make them pay, really pay, not just emotionally or financially, but socially. Expose them, let everyone know what they'd done, family, friends, co-workers, everyone. Drag the affair into the light and watch them squirm in the judgment of people they'd have to face every day. Make it impossible for them to rewrite the narrative, to paint themselves as victims, or to minimize what they'd done. Public shame, Old Testament justice. Rebecca felt guilty for even thinking it. It was vindictive, cruel, the kind of thing that would make her just as bad as them, maybe worse. But it also felt necessary. Right. Like if she didn't do this, if she just quietly left or quietly stayed, she'd be complicit in her own betrayal. She'd be letting them treat her like she didn't matter, like her feelings and her pain were acceptable collateral damage for their happiness. Rebecca spent the rest of the day thinking. She didn't call James, didn't respond to Emma's texts begging to talk. She just sat with the decision, turning it over in her mind, examining it from every angle. By the time James got home that evening, walking in with his usual cheerful greeting and work stories, Rebecca had made her choice. She smiled at him, she kissed him hello. She asked about his day and nodded at his answers and served dinner and acted completely normal, because she had a plan now. And the plan required patience, required strategy, required James and Emma thinking they'd gotten away with it, thinking Rebecca was still in the dark, still the trusting wife and loving sister who'd never suspect. Let them think that, let them get comfortable, let them make mistakes, because Rebecca was done being the person things happened to. She was about to become the person who made things happen, and when she did, You'll have to decide if she went too far. You'll have to decide who the real villain is in this story. But first, you need to see what came next. You need to see how far this rabbit hole goes. Because that earring, that confrontation, that was just the beginning. Over the next 2 weeks, Rebecca became someone she didn't recognize. She smiled and laughed and went to work and came home and cooked dinner and made love to her husband and never once let on that she knew. It was the hardest performance of her life. Every time James touched her, she felt her skin crawl. Every time he said he loved her, she wanted to scream, but she didn't. She stayed calm. She stayed strategic because she was gathering evidence now, building her case. She started checking James's phone every morning while he was in the shower, screenshotting texts from Emma, documenting the affair in detail. The messages were nauseating, not explicit, not pornographic, but intimate in ways that were almost worse. Inside jokes, pet names, references to specific encounters. "Remember the hotel on Tuesday? I still can't walk straight," Emma had written 3 days after Rebecca confronted her, apparently deciding that Rebecca's silence meant she'd accepted the bookshelf excuse. James had responded with, "Best money I ever spent. When can we do it again?" Rebecca learned they'd been meeting every Tuesday afternoon for months, James claiming he had a standing client meeting, Emma telling Marcus she had a yoga class. 2 hours every week at the same hotel downtown, a boutique place near Pike Place Market. Rebecca looked it up. Read reviews, 4 stars, romantic atmosphere, often booked for couples getaways. The irony made her want to laugh or cry, she wasn't sure which. She also discovered they texted constantly throughout the day, little messages that looked innocent on the surface but carried weight if you knew the context. "Thinking of you at 9 a.m. Wish you were here at lunch. Can't wait to see you at night." Rebecca wondered if Emma sent those messages while lying next to Marcus, if James sent them while sitting across from Rebecca at dinner. She also started watching them more carefully at family gatherings. The 4 of them still got together most weekends because Rebecca hadn't told anyone what she knew, and Emma and James were apparently happy to continue the charade. Rebecca noticed things she'd missed before. The way James's eyes followed Emma around the room. The way Emma touched James's arm when she laughed at his jokes, touches that lasted a beat too long. The way they'd disappear at the same time, James to grab another beer from the garage, Emma to use the bathroom, and both come back 5 minutes later looking flushed. Were they fucking in Rebecca's house while Rebecca and Marcus sat in the living room? The thought was so outrageous, so disrespectful, that Rebecca almost couldn't believe it. But she did believe it, because she was learning that there was no limit to how low they'd go. The worst part was Emma's texts to Rebecca. Throughout those 2 weeks, Emma sent her normal sister messages, photos of her cat, complaints about work, questions about what Rebecca wanted to do for their dad's birthday next month, like nothing had changed, like they hadn't had that confrontation in Rebecca's kitchen, like Emma hadn't admitted, however reluctantly, to sleeping with James. Rebecca responded normally, matching Emma's casual tone, even though every message made her want to throw her phone across the room. She sent back smiley emojis and agreed to birthday plans and commented on cat photos, all while documenting Emma's messages to James, building evidence of the double life her sister was living with such apparent ease. Rebecca's friends at work started asking if she was okay. She looked tired, they said, stressed. Was everything all right at home? Rebecca assured them it was fine, just busy, season at work, not sleeping well, nothing to worry about. Her boss asked if she needed time off. Rebecca said no. She couldn't afford to seem weak right now, couldn't afford to let her professional life crumble along with her personal one. So she threw herself into work, took on extra projects, stayed late at the office, partly to avoid going home to James and partly to keep her mind occupied. When she was working, she could almost forget. Almost. But then she'd go home and see James on the couch, his phone lighting up with a message from Emma, and the rage would come flooding back. She fantasized about revenge in vivid detail. Sometimes she imagined showing up at Emma and Marcus's house, banging on the door in the middle of the night, dragging Emma outside by her hair and screaming the truth for all the neighbors to hear. Sometimes she imagined forwarding all of James's texts to his boss, ruining his reputation at work, making sure everyone knew what kind of man he was. Sometimes she imagined more creative punishments, things that would humiliate them without being obviously illegal. She spent hours on revenge forums, reading stories of scorned spouses who'd emptied bank accounts or posted affair evidence on billboards or sent detailed emails to everyone in their partner's contact list. She judged none of them. She understood completely. When someone you love betrays you like this, when they take your trust and your vulnerability and weaponize it against you, normal moral boundaries start to feel less important. The desire for them to hurt the way you're hurting becomes overwhelming. But Rebecca wanted something more than just exposure. She wanted them to feel trapped, powerless, the way she'd felt sitting on that laundry room floor holding the earring. She wanted them to experience the moment when reality shifts and you realize you have no control, that your life is about to change in ways you can't stop. She wanted them to feel that terror. And slowly, over those 2 weeks of smiling and documenting and playing along, a plan started to form. It was risky, probably illegal, definitely crossing about a dozen moral lines, but it felt right in a way that just leaving or just telling Marcus didn't. It felt proportionate to the crime. The plan required preparation. On a Thursday afternoon, when James was at work and she had the house to herself, Rebecca went out to the detached storage room at the back of their property. They barely used it, just kept old furniture and holiday decorations and tools out there. The room had one door, solid wood, with a lock on the outside. A deadbolt they'd installed years ago because James was paranoid about theft. Rebecca examined the lock, tested it. It worked perfectly. The door was heavy, well insulated for temperature control. Someone inside could yell, but you probably wouldn't hear it from the house. Definitely wouldn't hear it from the street. The nearest neighbor was 100 yards away through trees. The room had no windows, just one overhead light. Rebecca stood in the doorway imagining it. Could this work? Could she actually do this? She spent the weekend thinking about logistics, about timing, about consequences. If she went through with this plan, there would be no going back. Legal consequences, probably, restraining orders, possible criminal charges, her reputation destroyed. Some people would call her a hero, others would call her a psychopath. Rebecca tried to care about that and found she couldn't, not really, because the anger burning in her chest was bigger than fear or social shame or legal risk. The anger demanded action, demanded justice, and Rebecca was going to give it exactly what it wanted. On Tuesday morning, Rebecca texted James at work. Client emergency. Have to fly to San Francisco today, might be gone overnight. I'll text you when I know more. James responded with a sad face emoji and good luck, babe, love you. 5 minutes later, she saw him text Emma. She's going out of town. Can you come over this afternoon? We'll have the house to ourselves. Emma responded immediately. Yes, 3 p.m. James sent a heart. Rebecca stared at the messages, feeling vindicated and disgusted in equal measure. They couldn't even wait one day, couldn't even pretend to have restraint or guilt. They were going to fuck in Rebecca's bed while she was supposedly out of town. The audacity of it was almost impressive. Rebecca didn't actually leave town. She drove to a coffee shop across the city and waited. At 2:45 p.m., she drove back to her neighborhood but parked down the street out of sight. She walked through the trees that bordered their property, approaching from the back. She timed this perfectly. Emma's car was in the driveway. James's car was in the garage. Rebecca crept to the back window and looked inside. She could see them in the living room, already undressing each other, kissing with the kind of passion that made Rebecca's stomach turn. She watched just long enough to confirm what she already knew. Then she moved to the storage room and unlocked it, propping the door open. She went back to the house and knocked, loud and urgent. Emma and James froze. She knocked again. She heard James curse, heard frantic movement. She knocked a third time and yelled, "James! Emma! I know you're in there!" The door flew open. James stood there, shirt buttoned wrong, face flushed, trying to look normal. "Rebecca, what are you—" "I thought you were in San Francisco." Behind him, Rebecca could see Emma frantically pulling on her jeans. "Flight got cancelled," Rebecca said calmly. "Last minute. I came home to get some files, but I'm so glad you're both here. Can you help me with something in the storage room? I need to move some boxes." The lie was transparent, and they both knew it. But what were they going to do? Refuse? Admit what they'd been doing? They followed her outside, both of them tense, exchanging glances. Rebecca led them to the storage room, gestured inside.
"Just need those boxes from the back corner." They hesitated. Rebecca smiled. "What's wrong? It'll just take a second." James went in first, Emma following. The moment they were both inside, Rebecca stepped back and slammed the door. She heard James yell, heard him lunge for the door, but she was faster.
She slid the deadbolt home with a metallic click that felt like the most satisfying sound she'd ever heard. "Rebecca!" James's voice came through the door, confused and angry. "What the fuck are you doing? Open the door!" Rebecca leaned against the wood, breathing hard, her heart pounding with adrenaline and terror and exhilaration. "No," she said. "I don't think I will." Inside the storage room, Emma was crying, pleading. "Rebecca, please, let us out. We can explain. We can talk about this." James was pounding on the door now, his fists making dull thuds against the wood. "This isn't funny. Open the fucking door right now." Rebecca sat down on the ground, her back against the door, listening to them panic. This was what she wanted. This feeling of power, of control, of making them understand what it felt like to be trapped. But now that she'd done it, now that they were actually locked in there, she had to figure out what came next. How long would she keep them there? What was the end game? She hadn't thought that far ahead. Or maybe she had, and just hadn't wanted to admit to herself what she was really planning to do. Because locking them in was just the first step. The real revenge, the real justice, was still to come. And it was going to be brutal. Rebecca sat outside the storage room for 30 minutes, listening to James and Emma's progression, from anger to panic to bargaining. James went through every stage predictably. First, he yelled, threatening legal action, demanding she let them out immediately. Then he switched to pleading, his voice taking on a softer tone, asking what she wanted, promising they could work this out. Emma's approach was different. She cried. She apologized over and over. She told Rebecca she loved her, that this was a mistake, that it meant nothing. Both of them were lying. Rebecca could hear it in their voices. They weren't sorry they'd done it. They were sorry they'd been caught. The pounding on the door gradually decreased as they realized Rebecca wasn't responding. She heard them talking to each other in low, urgent tones, trying to figure out what to do. Someone, probably Emma, was calling for help on their phone, but there was no signal out here. The storage room was in a dead zone, something James had complained about before when he couldn't stream music while working in the yard. Now that quirk of geography was working in Rebecca's favor. They were completely cut off. She wondered how long it would take them to understand the full extent of their situation. Rebecca pulled out her own phone. She opened her text thread with Marcus, Emma's husband. Sweet, unsuspecting Marcus, who had no idea his wife was currently locked in a storage room with her lover. Rebecca had been debating for 2 weeks whether to tell him, how to tell him, whether it was cruel or kind to destroy his world the way hers had been destroyed. Now, sitting here with the physical evidence of the affair trapped behind a locked door, the decision felt clear. Marcus deserved to know. More than that, he deserved to see. Not just hear about it secondhand, not just see text messages, but actually witness the truth in a way that left no room for manipulation or gaslighting. She typed out a message. Marcus, I need you to come to my house as soon as possible. It's urgent. About Emma. Please don't tell her I texted you. Just come. She hit send before she could second-guess herself. Marcus responded within seconds. On my way. Is she okay? Rebecca didn't answer. Let him worry. Let him show up not knowing what to expect. That uncertainty, that moment of dread before the truth hits, that's what Rebecca had experienced with the earring. Now, Marcus would experience it too. Not because she wanted to hurt him exactly, but because he was part of this. He was married to a woman who'd betrayed Rebecca in the most intimate way possible, and he had a right to know who he was sleeping next to every night. James's voice came through the door again. Calmer now, but with an edge of real fear. Rebecca, my phone is dying. Let us out before it dies completely. If something happens, if there's an emergency, we need to be able to call for help. Rebecca almost laughed. An emergency? Like being locked in a storage room by your wife after she caught you fucking her sister. That was definitely an emergency, just not the kind James was thinking of. She checked the time. 3:20. Marcus taught until 3:30, then had a 15-minute drive. He'd be here by 4 at the latest. Less than 40 minutes. Rebecca could hold them for 40 minutes. Probably. Maybe. She was starting to feel the weight of what she'd done, the reality of it settling in. She'd kidnapped 2 people. That's what this was. Technically, kidnapping, false imprisonment, whatever the legal term was for locking someone in a room against their will. She could go to jail for this. Probably would go to jail for this. The question was whether it would be worth it. Inside the storage room, Emma had started hyperventilating. Rebecca could hear her gasping, the classic signs of a panic attack. James was trying to calm her down, his voice low and soothing in a way he used to use with Rebecca when she was stressed. Breathe, Em. Just breathe. She'll let us out. She's just trying to scare us. Em, the nickname made Rebecca's blood boil. When had James started calling Emma that? How intimate were they, really? Were they in love, or was this just physical, just lust and opportunity and the thrill of forbidden touch? Did it matter? Either way, they'd chosen each other over Rebecca. They'd chosen their pleasure over her pain. They'd looked at everything Rebecca had given them, her love and trust and vulnerability, and decided it was worth less than hotel room sex on Tuesday afternoons. Rebecca heard a car pull up in the driveway. She stood up, brushing dirt off her jeans, and walked around to the front of the house. Marcus was getting out of his car, his face etched with worry. He was wearing his teacher clothes, khakis and a button-down shirt, his work bag still slung over his shoulder. "Rebecca," he called when he saw her. "What's going on? Where's Emma?" Rebecca gestured for him to follow her. "I need to show you something. But I need you to promise me you won't interrupt. Just watch. Just listen. Can you do that? Marcus looked confused but nodded. Okay, yeah, but you're scaring me. Is Emma hurt? Rebecca wanted to say yes, that Emma was hurt in the way you are when you betray someone you love, when you break fundamental moral boundaries and have to live with what you've done. But that wasn't what Marcus meant. She's fine, physically. Come on. She led him to the backyard, toward the storage room. As they got closer, Marcus could hear the voices inside. He stopped walking. Is that
James? Rebecca nodded. And Emma, they're in the storage room. Marcus looked at the locked door, then at Rebecca, his face cycling through confusion and realization and denial. Why are they locked in your storage room together? Rebecca, what is this? Rebecca pulled out her phone and opened the folder of screenshots she'd been compiling for 2 weeks.
She handed it to Marcus without a word. He took it, his hands starting to shake as he scrolled through the messages. James and Emma planning their meetups. James and Emma talking about sneaking around. James and Emma saying things to each other that should only be said between spouses. Marcus's face went pale. He looked at the door, then back at the phone, then at Rebecca. How long? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. I'm not sure, Rebecca said honestly. At least 6 months, maybe longer. Marcus sat down hard on the ground, like his legs had stopped working. He was still holding the phone, still staring at the screen, his brain trying to process something that didn't fit into his reality. Rebecca knew that feeling. She'd lived it for 2 weeks. Now Marcus was getting the crash course, learning in 60 seconds what had taken her days to fully absorb. His wife was cheating on him with his friend, with his wife's sister's husband. The betrayal was multi-directional, destroying 2 marriages simultaneously, ripping apart a family. It was almost impressive in its thoroughness. I want to hear them, Marcus said suddenly, standing up. His voice was different now, harder, angry. I want to hear what they have to say for themselves. Rebecca hesitated. Once she opened that door, there was no controlling what happened next. Marcus might attack James. Emma might have a complete breakdown. The police might get called. This situation, which was already a felony, might escalate into something violent. But looking at Marcus's face, the devastation and rage warring in his expression, Rebecca understood that he had the same right she did. The right to confrontation, the right to make them answer for what they'd done, the right to watch them squirm. She walked to the door and knocked once. The voices inside stopped immediately. Rebecca, James called. Finally, let us out. This has gone on long enough. Rebecca unlocked the deadbolt, but didn't open the door. I'm going to let you out, she said, but someone wants to talk to you first. She stepped back and gestured to Marcus. He pulled the door open. For a moment, everyone froze. James and Emma stood in the dim storage room, illuminated by the single overhead bulb, looking disheveled and scared. Marcus stood in the doorway, backlit by afternoon sun, his silhouette dark and imposing. Nobody spoke. Then Emma whispered, Marcus. And the sound of his name in her mouth, the guilt and fear in her voice, seemed to break whatever spell had held them all in place. Don't, Marcus said. Just that one word, but it carried so much weight. Don't explain. Don't apologize. Don't say my name like you have the right to. Emma started crying again, her whole body shaking. James looked between Marcus and Rebecca, calculating, trying to figure out how bad this was going to get. Marcus, man, I can explain, he started, but Marcus cut him off with a sharp gesture. Explain? You can explain why you've been fucking my wife? His voice cracked on the last word. You can explain why my best friend has been betraying me. Please, James, I'm dying to hear the explanation. James had the decency to look ashamed, or maybe he was just scared. Either way, he didn't respond. Emma tried. It wasn't supposed to happen. We didn't plan it. Things got complicated. Marcus laughed, a harsh sound that held no humor. Complicated, that's what we're calling it. You know what's complicated, Emma. Grading 130 essays every weekend, figuring out how to pay for the new roof we need, that's complicated. This? He gestured between Emma and James. This is a choice you made every single time you texted him, every single time you met him at that hotel, every single time you came home and kissed me and pretended everything was normal. Rebecca watched this unfold, feeling a mixture of vindication and horror. This was what she wanted, wasn't it? For them to face consequences, for their betrayal to be exposed in the harsh light of day, for them to feel the shame and pain they'd caused. But watching Marcus break down, watching him confront the destruction of his marriage, Rebecca felt something unexpected. Not quite regret, but a recognition of the magnitude of what she'd set in motion. This wasn't just her revenge anymore, it was collateral damage. Marcus was an innocent victim in this, someone who'd been hurt just as much as Rebecca, and now he was being forced to perform his pain for an audience. "Did you love him?" Marcus asked Emma, his voice quieter now. Emma shook her head frantically. No, Marcus. I love you. This was a mistake, a huge mistake. But I love you. Marcus turned to James. And you? Do you love my wife? James hesitated. That hesitation, that brief pause, told Rebecca everything. He did love Emma, or thought he did. This wasn't just an affair, it was a relationship. They had feelings for each other, real feelings, not just lust. Somehow that made it worse. If it had just been sex, just physical betrayal, maybe it could be forgiven. But emotional betrayal, actual love? How do you come back from that? I don't know, James finally said. I don't know what I feel. This whole thing is... He trailed off, not finishing the sentence. Rebecca finished it for him in her head. This whole thing is fucked up. This whole thing is wrong. This whole thing is a disaster that's destroying 4 people's lives. Yeah, James, that's exactly what it is. And you did it anyway, you and Emma both. You looked at the potential consequences and decided your desires were more important than anyone else's happiness. Marcus turned away from Emma and James, unable to look at them anymore. He walked over to Rebecca, his face wet with tears he wasn't bothering to hide. Thank you, he said, for telling me, for showing me. I know this wasn't easy for you either. Rebecca nodded, not trusting herself to speak. They stood together, 2 people whose worlds had imploded, united by betrayal. Behind them, Emma and James remained in the storage room, no longer trapped by a locked door, but by the enormity of what they'd have to face. Their marriages were over. Their friendship was dead. Their reputations were about to be destroyed because Rebecca wasn't done yet. This confrontation, this moment of truth, this was just the beginning of the consequences she'd planned. What happens now? Marcus asked. Rebecca looked at him, then back at Emma and James. Now, she said, everyone finds out. Every person who needs to know what they did. Your parents, my dad, our friends. Everyone at James's work. Everyone at the school where you teach. Everyone who trusted them and believed in them and thought they were good people. They wanted to have a secret affair? Fine, but they don't get to control who knows about it anymore. That's not their decision to make. Emma's eyes went wide with panic. Rebecca, please, you can't. My job, my reputation, please. Rebecca smiled, and it wasn't a nice smile.
You should have thought of that before you fucked my husband. Actions have consequences, Emma. You taught me that when we were kids. Remember, when I got in trouble for skipping school, and you told me I had to own my mistakes? Well, now you get to own yours, very publicly. James started to say something, probably a threat about lawyers or criminal charges for false imprisonment, but Rebecca cut him off. Say one more word and I send everything to your boss tonight. I have emails ready to go. Documented proof of every lie you told.
Every time you claimed to be working when you were actually with Emma. Do you really want me to hit send? James closed his mouth. Good. He was finally understanding that he had no power here, that Rebecca controlled this narrative now. She'd been powerless for so long, kept in the dark, manipulated, lied to. Now the tables had turned. Now she was the one with information and leverage. Now she got to decide what happened next. And what happened next was going to be devastating for James and Emma. But it was going to be justice for Rebecca. And maybe, just maybe, it would be a warning to anyone else who thought betrayal was worth the risk. Marcus pulled out his phone. I'm calling a lawyer, filing for divorce tomorrow. Emma started sobbing harder.
Marcus, please, can't we talk about this? Can't we try? Marcus looked at her like she was a stranger. Try? Try what, Emma? To rebuild trust. How am I supposed to trust you ever again? How am I supposed to sleep next to you, knowing where you've been, what you've done? No, we're done. I want you out of the house by tomorrow. He walked away toward his car, leaving Emma standing in the storage room doorway crying. Rebecca watched him go, feeling a kinship with him. They were both walking away from marriages they thought were solid, both starting over from ruins, both learning what betrayal felt like when it came from someone you loved. Rebecca turned to James. You have 1 hour to pack a bag and leave. I'm filing for divorce Monday morning. My lawyer will be in touch about asset division. Until then, you're not welcome in this house. James opened his mouth like he wanted to argue, then seemed to think better of it. He walked past Rebecca without touching her, without saying anything, just a defeated slump to his shoulders. She watched him go into the house, listened to him moving around upstairs, packing. Emma was still in the storage room, sitting on the floor now, her arms wrapped around her knees. Rebecca walked over to her. You need to leave too. Emma looked up, her face blotchy from crying. Where am I supposed to go? Marcus won't let me come home. Rebecca shrugged. Not my problem. Maybe ask James if you can stay at whatever hotel you've been using for your Tuesday meetings. I'm sure they have availability. It was cruel. Rebecca knew it was cruel, but she couldn't bring herself to care. Emma had made her bed, quite literally. Now she could lie in it. I'm sorry, Emma whispered. I know you don't believe me, but I am. I never wanted to hurt you. Rebecca crouched down so she was eye level with her sister. You didn't want to hurt me. Then what did you think would happen when I found out? Did you think I'd just be okay with it? That I'd understand? Or did you think you'd never get caught? Emma didn't answer. Because the answer was obvious. She'd thought they'd never get caught. She'd thought she could have both, the security of her marriage to Marcus and the excitement of her affair with James. She'd thought she was smarter than Rebecca, more careful, that she could maintain the lie indefinitely. She'd been wrong. Get out of my yard, Rebecca said, standing up. And Emma? I meant what I said. Everyone is going to find out. I'm going to make sure of it. You destroyed my life. Now I'm going to show everyone who you really are. Emma left, stumbling toward her car, barely able to see through her tears. Rebecca watched both cars drive away, Emma's and then James's 15 minutes later.
Then she was alone in her house, the sudden silence deafening after all the confrontation and drama. She walked through the rooms, seeing evidence of their life together everywhere. Photos on the walls from their wedding, from vacations, from happy times that now felt like lies. Furniture they'd picked out together, kitchen gadgets they'd received as wedding gifts. A whole shared life that was now ash. Rebecca wanted to destroy it all, throw every photo in the garbage, smash every dish, burn every memory. But she didn't. Instead, she sat on the couch and let herself cry for the first time since finding the earring. She cried for her marriage. She cried for her relationship with Emma. She cried for the naive version of herself who'd believed in happily ever after. She cried until there were no tears left, until she felt empty and raw and exhausted. Then she dried her face and opened her laptop. She had work to do, emails to send, evidence to distribute, a reputation to destroy, because this wasn't over. The confrontation was done, but the reckoning had just begun. James and Emma had made their choice. Now they'd live with it, publicly, painfully, permanently. And Rebecca, she'd rebuild somehow, eventually, after she'd finished making sure everyone knew exactly who to blame for the destruction of two families. After she'd extracted every ounce of justice she was owed. After she'd proven that you don't betray Rebecca and walk away unscathed. She was going to make them infamous. And maybe that made her a bad person too. Maybe that made her just as wrong as they were. But she'd let you decide that. Because right now, sitting in her empty house, surrounded by the wreckage of her life, Rebecca didn't care about being good. She only cared about being heard. In the weeks following that confrontation in the storage room, Rebecca learned what it meant to truly burn bridges. She didn't just tell people about the affair, she documented it. She created a detailed timeline with screenshots of text messages, credit card statements from the hotel charges James had tried to hide, even security footage she'd obtained from the building where James worked, showing Emma entering and leaving during hours when she was supposedly at yoga. She presented this evidence methodically, clinically, to everyone who mattered. Started with their father, Rebecca and Emma's dad, who lived 2 hours away in Tacoma. She drove there on a Saturday morning and laid it all out for him at his kitchen table, watched his face go through stages of disbelief and anger, and finally devastating sadness as he realized both his daughters' marriages were ending, and one of his daughters was the cause. He'd tried to be diplomatic at first, suggesting family counseling, saying everyone makes mistakes, asking if reconciliation was possible. But when Rebecca showed him the messages, the sheer volume of them, the calculated nature of the deception, something in him hardened. He told Rebecca he supported her. Told her Emma had always been impulsive, but this crossed a line. Said he'd talk to Emma but couldn't promise he'd be kind about it. Rebecca hadn't asked him to choose sides, but he chose anyway. That loss, the loss of her father's neutral ground, was something Emma would have to live with. Next were the friends. Rebecca and James had couple friends, people they'd known for years, people who'd been at their wedding and subsequent anniversary parties. Rebecca invited them over in small groups, always under the guise of some casual reason, then told them what had happened, showed them proof when they seemed skeptical. Most people reacted with shock and sympathy for Rebecca. A few tried to stay neutral, saying they didn't want to get involved in couple drama. Rebecca didn't fight that. She just thanked them for their time and moved on, knowing their neutrality was its own kind of judgment. Some of James's friends confronted him directly, and word got back to Rebecca that he'd lost several close friendships over it. Good. Let him feel isolated. Let him understand what it meant to lose your support system. Emma's situation was worse. Marcus had indeed filed for divorce, and he hadn't been quiet about the reasons. He'd told his family, told their friends, told people at the school where they both worked. Emma worked as a guidance counselor at a different school in the district, but news traveled fast in education circles. Within a week, everyone knew. She tried to do damage control, tried to paint it as a complicated situation, but Rebecca had been strategic about releasing information. Every time Emma tried to control the narrative, Rebecca would release another piece of evidence, another text message, another credit card charge, another lie Emma had told that Rebecca could prove false. It was psychological warfare, and Rebecca was winning. The fallout reached Emma's workplace. A guidance counselor embroiled in an affair scandal, particularly one this messy, wasn't a good look. Parents started asking questions. Administration got involved. Emma wasn't fired exactly, but she was strongly encouraged to take a leave of absence. She did. Marcus told Rebecca that Emma had moved back in with her father temporarily, that she was seeing a therapist, that she'd asked about reconciliation multiple times, but Marcus wouldn't consider it. Rebecca felt a flicker of something that might have been guilt, or might have been satisfaction. Hard to tell anymore, the emotions all blended together into one grey soup of exhaustion and vindication and loss. James fared slightly better professionally, but only slightly. His firm didn't care much about his personal life, but the distraction affected his work. He missed deadlines, lost focus in meetings, made uncharacteristic mistakes. Rebecca heard through mutual connections that he'd been passed over for a promotion he'd been counting on. He'd moved into a small apartment downtown, was dating Emma openly now since there was no point in hiding anymore. That was interesting. Despite everything, despite the exposure and consequences and public shame, they'd stayed together. Rebecca couldn't decide if that made them romantic or stupid, maybe both. Rebecca herself was surviving more than thriving. She'd thrown herself into work with manic energy, taking on every project she could, staying at the office until 9 or 10 most nights. Her boss had pulled her aside to express concern about burnout, but Rebecca insisted she was fine. She wasn't fine. She was running on rage and revenge and the hollow satisfaction of watching Emma and James's lives implode. But she was functional. She was paying her bills. She wasn't drinking herself into oblivion or having panic attacks in grocery store parking lots. By post-betrayal standards, she was doing okay. The divorce proceedings were ugly. James wanted half the house despite Rebecca having paid 60% of the down payment from her inheritance. He wanted half her retirement account despite his own being significantly larger. He wanted to split assets down the middle while conveniently forgetting all the debt he'd racked up. Rebecca's lawyer was ruthless, painting James as an adulterer who destroyed the marriage and arguing he deserved nothing. They eventually settled on terms that heavily favored Rebecca. James had to buy out her portion of his retirement account. She got the house. He got stuck with most of the debt. It wasn't everything she wanted, but it was justice of a sort. Financial justice to match the emotional devastation. Emma and Marcus's divorce was moving faster since they had no kids and fewer assets to fight over. Marcus wanted out as quickly as possible. Emma kept trying to delay, claiming she needed more time to find housing, to get her mental health sorted, to figure out what came next. The judge wasn't sympathetic. By midsummer, 3 months after Rebecca had locked them in the storage room, Emma and Marcus's marriage was legally over. Emma had lost her husband, her sister, her father's respect, her job, and most of her friend group. Rebecca wanted to feel triumphant about that, wanted to feel like justice had been served, but mostly she just felt tired. She'd started therapy herself, finally admitting that maybe public revenge wasn't the healthiest coping mechanism. Her therapist was careful not to judge, but Rebecca could sense disapproval under the professional neutrality. The storage room incident especially. That must have felt very powerful in the moment, the therapist had said. Rebecca agreed it had. And now? The therapist asked. How does it feel now? Complicated. That was the honest answer. Locking them in, exposing them, watching their lives fall apart, all of it had felt necessary at the time. But Rebecca couldn't help wondering if she'd gone too far. If her need for revenge had made her just as bad as them. If she'd sacrificed her own humanity in pursuit of their suffering. Her therapist introduced concepts like radical acceptance and letting go of resentment and forgiveness for your own peace. Rebecca listened and nodded and thought about trying, but she wasn't there yet. Maybe she'd never be there. Maybe some betrayals were too big to forgive. Maybe James and Emma had earned every bit of pain they'd received. Or maybe Rebecca had become the villain of her own story, letting anger poison her into someone she didn't recognize. She honestly couldn't tell anymore. Social gatherings were awkward now. The friend group had splintered. Team Rebecca versus Team Emma, though Team Emma was significantly smaller. People who tried to stay neutral just stopped hosting events rather than navigate the politics of who to invite. Rebecca found herself lonely in ways she hadn't expected. Yes, people supported her. Yes, everyone agreed Emma and James had been wrong. But supporting someone through a betrayal and actually wanting to hang out with them are different things. Rebecca's pain made people uncomfortable. Her anger made them nervous. They liked her better when she was the fun, easygoing person she'd been before. They didn't know what to do with this brittle, vengeful version. So they gradually pulled away, and Rebecca didn't have the energy to chase them. 6 months after finding the earring, Rebecca attended her father's birthday party. She'd almost skipped it, knowing Emma would be there, but her dad had asked her directly to come, and she couldn't say no. She showed up braced for confrontation. Emma was in the kitchen when Rebecca arrived, and they locked eyes across the room. For a moment, Rebecca saw her baby sister, the kid she'd read bedtime stories to, the teenager she'd taught to drive, the woman she'd thought would be part of her life forever. Then Emma looked away, and Rebecca remembered why that person didn't exist anymore. Why the trust was gone and couldn't be rebuilt. They avoided each other all afternoon. Rebecca talked to her dad, made small talk with cousins, pretended to be fine. Emma did the same from the other side of the room. It was James's absence that hung over everything. He wasn't invited, obviously. But the empty space where he should have been felt loud. This was their family, had been for 7 years. Now it wasn't. Now he was the outsider, and Emma was the pariah, and Rebecca was the wronged party everyone pitied. Nobody won. That's what Rebecca was starting to realize. There were no winners in this story, just different degrees of losing. As she was leaving, Emma caught her in the driveway. "Can we talk?" she asked. Rebecca's first instinct was to say no, to get in her car and drive away. But something in Emma's face made her pause. Her sister looked terrible. Thin, dark circles under her eyes, hair that needed cutting. The affair and its aftermath had aged her. 5 minutes, Rebecca said. They stood by Rebecca's car, not touching, maintaining careful distance. Emma spoke first. "I know you hate me. I deserve that. I just want you to know that I've thought about what I did every single day since. I've lost everything. My marriage, my job, my relationship with Dad, with you, and I know that's my fault. I know I did this. But Rebecca, I need you to understand I never wanted to hurt you. I know that sounds insane given what I did, but it's true. I got caught up in something that felt good, and I convinced myself it wasn't really that bad, and I was so wrong." Rebecca listened without interrupting. When Emma finished, Rebecca took a breath before responding. You want me to understand? Fine. I understand that you chose feeling good over being good. I understand that you valued your own pleasure more than my pain. I understand that you're sorry now because you got caught and faced consequences, not because you suddenly grew a conscience. What I don't understand is how my sister, my best friend, the person who was supposed to protect me,
could betray me so completely and then expect me to care that she's suffering now. Emma started crying. I don't expect you to care. I just needed to say I'm sorry, for whatever it's worth. Rebecca got in her car. It's worth nothing, Emma. Your apology means nothing because you can't undo what you did. You can't give me back the years of my life you destroyed.
You can't make me trust you again. You can't fix this. So your apology is just words. Empty words that make you feel better, but don't change anything for me. She drove away, leaving Emma standing in the driveway. And as Rebecca merged onto the highway, heading back to her empty house and her empty life, she wondered if she'd just done the right thing or thrown away any chance at eventual healing. Her therapist would say holding on to anger was like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. But Rebecca wasn't ready to stop drinking yet. The anger was the only thing keeping her upright. Without it, she'd collapse into grief. And she wasn't ready for that either. Now, 8 months after finding the earring, here's where everyone stands. Rebecca is still in the house she and James bought together, though it doesn't feel like home anymore. She's refinanced the mortgage in her name only, repainted the walls, replaced furniture that carried too many memories. She's dating casually, nothing serious, mostly just reminding herself that physical intimacy doesn't have to come with betrayal. Work is good. She got promoted, has a new team, stays busy, stays distracted. Her therapist says she's making progress, learning to sit with uncomfortable emotions instead of weaponizing them. Rebecca thinks her therapist is overly optimistic, but doesn't say so. James and Emma are still together, living in a small apartment, both working again, but at new companies where their scandal hasn't followed them. Rebecca heard they're planning to get married once his divorce is finalized. The irony is almost poetic. They destroyed 2 marriages to create their own. Whether that marriage will last is anyone's guess. Rebecca hopes it doesn't, but she's trying not to care, trying to let them fade into irrelevance. Not there yet, but working on it. Marcus has started dating someone new, a teacher at his school who'd been divorced herself and apparently understood what he'd been through. He'd reached out to Rebecca a few times, comparing notes on healing, forming an unlikely friendship over their shared betrayal. It helped, knowing someone understood the specific flavor of this pain. They'd grab coffee occasionally, trade war stories, support each other through particularly rough days. Nothing romantic would ever happen between them. They'd both been too destroyed by their exes to trust that quickly, but the friendship mattered. Rebecca's relationship with her father remained solid. Her relationship with Emma was non-existent. They didn't speak, didn't text, existed in completely separate spheres. Their dad had tried to broker peace a few times, suggesting family counseling or mediation, but Rebecca wasn't interested. Some broken things couldn't be fixed. Some relationships couldn't survive certain betrayals. This was one of them. Emma had chosen James over Rebecca. Rebecca chose herself over Emma. Fair trade. The friend group had never recovered. Too much drama, too many sides, too much baggage. Most of those friendships had faded into occasional social media likes and generic happy birthday messages. Rebecca had made new friends, mostly through work, people who knew her as she was now rather than who she'd been. It was easier that way. No one pitied her. No one knew the whole story. She was just Rebecca, the marketing director, not Rebecca, the wronged wife. She preferred that version of herself. Financial consequences had been significant for everyone. Rebecca had gotten the better end of the divorce settlement, but legal fees had still eaten into her savings. She'd had to rebuild her emergency fund, adjust her retirement timeline. James had lost more, his career trajectory damaged, his expenses doubled living alone. Emma's leave of absence had cost her a year of income, and finding a new job in education after the scandal had been difficult. Marcus had kept his job, but the divorce had depleted his savings too. Betrayal is expensive. Turns out integrity has a price tag, and it's higher than most people realize. Emotionally, Rebecca was surviving. Not thriving, not healed, but surviving. She had days where she felt almost normal, where hours would pass without thinking about James or Emma or what they'd done. Then she'd have days where the anger came roaring back, where she'd spiral into thoughts of additional revenge she could enact, ways she could make them hurt more. Her therapist assured her this was normal, that healing wasn't linear. Rebecca tried to believe her. The question that kept her up at night wasn't whether James and Emma were wrong, that was obvious. It was whether she'd been wrong too. Wrong to lock them in the storage room. Wrong to expose them so thoroughly. Wrong to pursue revenge instead of just walking away and rebuilding quietly. Her therapist refused to answer that question. "I'm here to help you process your feelings, not judge your actions," she'd say. But Rebecca needed judgment. Needed someone to tell her if she'd gone too far. Needed verdict. That's where you come in. You've heard everything now. You know what they did and what Rebecca did in response. You know about the pearl earring and the Tuesday afternoon hotel rooms and the screenshots Rebecca collected like evidence in a trial. You know about the storage room and the public exposure and the systematic destruction of their reputations. You know about the aftermath, the divorces and job losses and shattered families, every detail, every complication, every grey area and moral quandary. So that's the complete story. Rebecca found out her husband and sister were having an affair. Instead of quietly leaving or quietly confronting, she trapped them physically, exposed them publicly, and made sure everyone in their lives knew exactly what they'd done. She destroyed their reputations, their relationships, their sense of safety and privacy. She pursued revenge with methodical precision and no mercy. Some people would call that justice. Others would call it abuse. Rebecca herself isn't sure which it was. Now it's your turn to decide. Was Rebecca wrong? Were James and Emma the only villains? Or did Rebecca become one too? Is there a statute of limitations on revenge for betrayal? A point where it goes from justified to excessive? Did locking them in the storage room cross a line? Did exposing them to everyone they knew? At what point did Rebecca's understandable rage become something darker? Or was she entitled to every bit of revenge she extracted? Were James and Emma's destroyed lives proportionate to the destruction they caused? Is there such thing as too much justice? Think carefully about this, because it's easy to say what you do in theory, sitting comfortably wherever you are, judging this story from a distance. But when betrayal is theoretical, revenge sounds simple. When it's your life exploding, when it's your sister and your husband stealing pieces of you in hotel rooms while you're home alone, thinking you're safe, when it's your trust shattered into pieces so small you can't imagine ever putting it back together, that's when choices get complicated. That's when moral certainty becomes moral chaos. That's when people do things they never thought they'd do. Things that might be justice or might be cruelty or might be both at once. Rebecca made her choices. She stands by them mostly, though doubts creep in during her darkest moments. But she doesn't know if she was right. She just knows she couldn't have done nothing. couldn't have absorbed that betrayal quietly and moved on, couldn't have let James and Emma get away with it without consequences. Whether the consequences she doled out were fair or excessive, proportionate or vindictive, that's for you to determine. You're the jury now. The evidence has been presented, the testimony has been given, every perspective has been explored. The complicated truth of human betrayal and human rage has been laid out in all its messy, painful detail. Now you deliberate. You decide who the real villain is. You decide if Rebecca was justified or if she became the monster. You decide where the line is between justice and revenge. You decide what you would have done in her position. The verdict is yours, and before you cast it, before you make up your mind about who was wrong and who was right, and whether anyone in this story deserves sympathy or condemnation, is something else you need to understand. The psychology behind what you just witnessed, the machinery of betrayal that drove James and Emma, the trauma responses that drove Rebecca, the manipulation tactics and coping mechanisms and emotional warfare that turned four normal people into this catastrophe. Because understanding the why doesn't excuse the what, but it helps you render a more informed verdict. It helps you see the clues you might have missed. It helps you protect yourself from becoming part of a similar story. So let's break it down. Let's expose the mechanics of betrayal and revenge. Let's talk about what actually happened here beneath the surface drama. You've heard the story. Now let's decode it. You've heard the story. You feel the anger, the confusion, maybe even the satisfaction of watching Emma and James face consequences. But do you know exactly what happened to your brain just now? Do you understand the specific psychological weapons that were deployed throughout this narrative? This isn't just a story about cheating and revenge. It's a case study in manipulation, trauma response, and the dark side of human psychology. Let me show you the machinery underneath the drama. Let me reveal the specific psychological weapon that destroyed Rebecca's reality before she even knew she was under attack. The primary toxic dynamic at play here has a name: betrayal blindness, working in conjunction with compartmentalization. These aren't just academic terms. They're the exact mechanisms that allowed James and Emma to maintain their double lives while Rebecca remained oblivious despite mounting evidence. Here's how it works mechanically. Think of your brain as a threat detection system that's constantly scanning for danger. But there's a glitch in the programming. When a threat comes from someone you've categorized as safe, someone essential to your survival or well-being, your brain will actively suppress awareness of that threat. Why? Because acknowledging it would force you to act, and acting might mean losing that essential relationship. Your subconscious decides it's safer to remain ignorant than to confront a truth that could destroy your entire support structure. Rebecca demonstrated this perfectly in the early stages. Remember when she came home to find James and Emma sitting close on the couch, their body language suspicious? Remember the text from Emma that said, "Miss you already," with a heart emoji? Remember the intense conversation at Rebecca's birthday party? Each of these were red flags, evidence that something was wrong. But Rebecca's brain immediately generated innocent explanations because accepting the truth would have meant accepting that her husband and sister were betraying her. That level of betrayal was too catastrophic to process, so her brain chose ignorance. It wasn't stupidity, it wasn't naivety, it was a survival mechanism. Her subconscious was protecting her from information she wasn't ready to handle. Now look at James and Emma's side. They were using compartmentalization, the ability to separate their affair into a mental box completely disconnected from their other relationships. When James was with Rebecca, he could genuinely feel like a loving husband because he'd compartmentalized Emma into a different category. The affair existed in one box, his marriage existed in another, and he'd built mental walls thick enough that the two never touched. Same with Emma. She could text Rebecca about normal sister stuff, show up for family dinners, act completely natural, because she'd separated Sister Emma from Affair Emma so thoroughly that they felt like different people to her. This is why their early interactions didn't seem suspicious to Rebecca. James and Emma weren't consciously performing innocence. They actually felt innocent in those moments because they'd successfully compartmentalized the affair away. The guilt, the deception, all of it got locked in a mental box that only opened during their Tuesday hotel meetings. The rest of the time, they were able to exist as the people they'd always been, authentic in their other relationships because they'd mentally severed those relationships from the betrayal. But here's where it gets interesting. Remember in the story when Rebecca found the messages and confronted Emma, and Emma's first instinct was to lie? That wasn't calculated deception. That was cognitive dissonance in action, the compartmentalization breaking down under direct challenge. For months, Emma had maintained two separate realities. When Rebecca forced those realities to collide by presenting undeniable evidence, Emma's brain short-circuited. The lie about the earring falling off during the bookshelf move, that was her compartmentalization, desperately trying to rebuild itself, trying to keep the boxes separate, trying to maintain the fiction that Affair Emma and Sister Emma were unrelated. And notice how both James and Emma kept saying it just happened, or it's complicated. That language reveals their compartmentalization. In their minds, the affair existed outside their agency, in a separate sphere where normal moral rules didn't apply. It wasn't that they consciously decided to betray Rebecca. It's that they'd created a mental framework where the affair and the betrayal weren't connected, where their actions in one box had no bearing on their actions in another box. That's why they seemed genuinely confused when confronted with the magnitude of their betrayal. They'd spent so long keeping everything compartmentalized that they'd almost convinced themselves it wasn't really betrayal at all. This dynamic betrayal blindness in the victim combined with compartmentalization in the perpetrators is the foundation of almost every affair that goes undetected for months or years. The victim's brain suppresses awareness because the threat is too dangerous to acknowledge. The perpetrator's brains separate the affair into a mental space where it doesn't feel real or consequential. Both sides are essentially in denial, but for different reasons. Neither side is seeing reality clearly. The victim can't see the obvious signs. The perpetrators can't see the obvious consequences. Everyone is operating in a distorted reality until something forces all those mental boxes to burst open. That something was the pearl earring, physical evidence that couldn't be explained away, that broke through Rebecca's betrayal blindness and shattered James and Emma's compartmentalization simultaneously. Once the boxes broke, once everyone could see the full picture, the psychological edifice collapsed. James and Emma couldn't maintain the fiction that this was separate from their real lives. Rebecca couldn't maintain the fiction that everything was fine. Reality asserted itself brutally and the aftermath was inevitable. Now let's talk about Rebecca's response because her trauma manifested in a very specific way. Reactive rage coupled with a need for restorative justice. When someone experiences betrayal trauma, especially from multiple trusted sources simultaneously, the brain goes into crisis mode. One common response is hypervigilance and control-seeking behavior. Rebecca couldn't control what had already happened, but she could control the consequences. She could control who knew. She could control the narrative. She could control, temporarily, James and Emma's physical location by locking them in the storage room. That storage room incident, that was Rebecca's traumatized brain attempting to recreate the feeling of power she'd lost. For months, she'd been powerless without knowing it, manipulated and lied to, while James and Emma controlled her reality. When she discovered the truth, her immediate impulse was to reverse that dynamic, lock them up, make them powerless, make them experience the helplessness she'd felt. It wasn't rational, it was pure trauma response, the reptile brain taking over and demanding some form of equalization. And the public exposure? That was restorative justice seeking, an attempt to force the community to acknowledge the crime and punish the perpetrators. In Rebecca's mind, not consciously but instinctively, James and Emma had committed a crime against her. But the legal system doesn't punish emotional betrayal. Divorce court would divide assets and end the marriage, but it wouldn't validate Rebecca's sense of violation. So she created her own justice system, using social consequences as the punishment. She needed everyone to know what happened, needed the truth to be witnessed and judged by others, needed external validation that she was the victim and they were the criminals. This is actually a well-documented trauma response. When institutional justice fails or doesn't exist, victims will often create vigilante justice systems. Rebecca documented evidence like a prosecutor building a case. She presented her findings systematically to different audiences. She pursued consequences with the methodical thoroughness of a court system. She was traumatized and her brain was trying to restore order through whatever means available. The problem, of course, is that vigilante justice often crosses ethical lines. It provides emotional satisfaction to the victim but can cause collateral damage and make the victim into a secondary perpetrator. Which brings us to the synthesis. When you combine betrayal blindness and compartmentalization with reactive rage and restorative justice seeking, you don't get a relationship. You don't even get a normal affair and breakup. You get a psychological hostage situation where everyone is trapped by their own damaged cognition. Rebecca was trapped by her need for control and consequences. James and Emma were trapped by the collapse of their compartmentalization and their inability to manage guilt they'd never had to confront before. Marcus was trapped by being pulled into a trauma that wasn't his, but affected him just as severely. Everyone became imprisoned by the psychological machinery of betrayal and trauma response. This is what I needed you to see. The story isn't just about who was right and who was wrong. It's about how human psychology creates these catastrophes in the first place. James and Emma didn't set out to destroy two families. They set out to feel good, and their brains provided the compartmentalization that let them pursue that feeling without confronting consequences until it was too late. Rebecca didn't set out to become vindictive. She set out to survive a trauma, and her brain provided the rage and control-seeking that felt like survival in the moment, but might have caused more damage in the long run. Everyone was operating from damaged psychological machinery, making choices that felt necessary or justified or inevitable in the moment. But that looked increasingly questionable from the outside. So before you pass judgment, understand this. You're not just judging actions. You're judging trauma responses. You're judging people whose psychological defense mechanisms went haywire under extreme stress. You're judging what humans do when they're operating from their most primitive brain functions rather than their rational minds. Does understanding the psychology excuse the behavior? Maybe. Maybe not. That's still for you to decide. But it complicates the moral calculation, doesn't it? It's harder to call someone purely evil when you understand they were acting from a place of psychological damage or cognitive distortion. It's also harder to call someone purely innocent when you understand how their trauma responses created new traumas for others. The verdict is still yours. But now you have the decoder ring. Now you can see the psychological weapons that were used, intentionally or not. Now you understand why everyone involved made such catastrophic choices. The question is whether that understanding changes your judgment, whether knowing the machinery behind the drama makes you more or less sympathetic to each person's actions, whether psychological explanations justify moral failures. That's what you have to determine. And to help you make that determination as informed as possible, let's talk about the red flags you need to recognize in your own life. Because this story isn't just about Rebecca and James and Emma. It's a warning system, a field guide to betrayal. Let me show you the 5 flags that, if you see them, I mean, the ending is almost mathematically guaranteed. We usually only see red flags in the rearview mirror, don't we? After the affair's been discovered, after the betrayal's been exposed, we look back and think, oh, that's what that meant, or I should have known. But I want to change that. I want to give you the ability to recognize these patterns in real time before you're sitting on a laundry room floor holding evidence of your own destroyed reality. These 5 flags aren't just mistakes or rough patches. They're warnings of future escalation. If you see them, if you really see them and acknowledge them, the catastrophic ending becomes predictable, mathematical, inevitable unless you act. Flag number 1, the subtle beginning that looks like passion but isn't. Remember at the beginning of Rebecca's story how James and Emma's affair started? It wasn't sudden. It was a progression of boundary erosions, small touches that lasted too long, private jokes that excluded spouses, texting at inappropriate hours with heart emojis. Each individual incident looked innocent, could be explained away, felt like maybe you're overreacting if you mention it. That's the flag. When someone close to your partner, whether it's a co-worker or friend or, God help you, your own sibling, starts creating a private emotional world with them that exists alongside but separate from your relationship, you're watching an affair begin. At the beginning of Rebecca's story, when James's face would light up differently for Emma than it did for Rebecca, when Emma and James would have intense private conversations at parties, those were the early stages. That was love bombing and emotional affair establishing itself before any physical line got crossed. The test for distinguishing healthy closeness from toxic emotional enmeshment is this: can that relationship exist fully in the light? If James had been having deep emotional conversations with Emma and immediately sharing them with Rebecca, if those texts with heart emojis were in a group chat rather than private, if the friendship required secrecy or omission, that's your answer. Healthy relationships are transparent. They don't require discretion from spouses. If someone is building an emotional connection with your partner that requires your ignorance to survive, you're not watching a friendship. You're watching foundation being poured for an affair. Action. If you see this, pause and ask directly, I notice you and X have gotten really close. That's fine, but I need to understand the boundaries of that relationship. Can you show me your text history with them? Not because I don't trust you, but because transparency helps me feel secure. Their response will tell you everything. An innocent person will show you without hesitation. Someone building toward an affair will react with defensiveness, accusations of jealousy, or claims that you're being controlling. That defensive response is confirmation that you're right to be concerned. Flag number 2, the boundary violation where a no gets ignored or negotiated away. Look for the moment in Rebecca's story where she first felt uncomfortable about something, but was talked out of her discomfort. It's subtle. It might have been when she expressed concern about how much time James spent texting someone from work, and he reassured her it was nothing while continuing to do it. It might have been when she suggested they should have a device-free evening, and he agreed, but kept checking his phone anyway. The specific incident doesn't matter. What matters is the pattern. You express a boundary or concern, it's acknowledged, then it's violated anyway. And the violation is minimized or rationalized until you question whether you had a right to the boundary in the first place. This flag is the best predictor of future behavior because it demonstrates something crucial. The other person's comfort matters more to them than your security. They're willing to make you doubt your own instincts rather than change their behavior. In Rebecca's case, every time she felt that twinge of something's off, and James or Emma reassured her it was nothing, that was a boundary violation. They were training her to ignore her instincts, to override her internal alarm system, to accept their version of reality over her own observations. The test here is absolute. If someone consistently responds to your boundaries with anything other than immediate compliance, you're in a relationship with someone who doesn't respect your needs. Notice I said consistent. Everyone occasionally forgets or makes mistakes. But when you express the same boundary 3 times and it keeps getting violated, when you have to negotiate for basic respect repeatedly, when your partner regularly does exactly the thing you've asked them not to do, you're not dealing with forgetfulness, you're dealing with contempt. They're showing you through their actions that what you need doesn't matter as much as what they want. Action. The counter move is to stop negotiating. Boundaries aren't open for debate. They're statements of what you require to feel safe in the relationship. If your partner repeatedly violates a reasonable boundary after you've clearly stated it, you have 3 options. Accept that this boundary will never be respected and decide if you can live with that. Enforce consequences for violations until respect is established, or leave the relationship. What you can't do is keep stating the boundary without enforcement and expect different results. That's just training yourself to accept disrespect. Flag number 3, the reality distortion where history gets rewritten and you start feeling crazy. This one's insidious. Rebecca experienced it when James would claim he'd told her about plans when he hadn't, when Emma would insist conversations happened differently than Rebecca remembered, when both of them would make Rebecca question her own perception of events. This is gaslighting in its truest form, making someone doubt their grip on reality by consistently contradicting their memories and observations. The classic example from the story, Rebecca finding the earring and Emma immediately creating an elaborate story about the bookshelf. Something that didn't happen, but was detailed enough to sound plausible. When Rebecca pushed back, Emma didn't admit the truth. She doubled down, adding more detail, making Rebecca second guess whether maybe the bookshelf move did happen and she'd just forgotten. That's reality distortion. The goal isn't just to cover up the specific lie. The goal is to make you question whether you can trust your own mind. Here's why this flag is deadly. Once you start doubting your own perceptions, you become completely dependent on the other person's version of reality. You stop trusting your instincts because your instincts have been wrong so many times before. You stop bringing up concerns because you've been convinced you're misremembering or misinterpreting. You become a perfect victim, someone who can be lied to with impunity because you no longer trust yourself enough to call out the lies. The test: start documenting. When someone tells you something happened, write it down with a timestamp. When you observe something concerning, make a note. When you have a conversation about boundaries or plans, send a follow-up text summarizing what was said. If you find yourself constantly referring to this documentation and discovering that your memory was correct and their version was false, you're being gaslit. If they react to your documentation with anger or accusations of being paranoid, that's confirmation. An honest person doesn't mind you keeping records because they have nothing to hide. Action. What you say when someone does this to you is simple and direct. I understand that's your memory of what happened, but it's not mine. I'm not going to debate whose memory is correct. I'm going to trust my own perception. And then hold that line. Don't let them argue you into doubting yourself. Your perception is your reality. If their perception contradicts yours consistently, that's information about them, not about you. Either they're genuinely terrible at remembering things, in which case they should appreciate your documentation, or they're deliberately rewriting history, in which case you need to protect yourself. Flag number 4, the isolation and control disguised as love and protection. This flag didn't feature prominently in Rebecca's story because her betrayal was of a different type, but it's crucial to recognize in any relationship. This is when your partner gradually separates you from other support systems, your friends, your family, your independent interests, always framed as us against the world, or I just want to spend time with you, or They don't understand our relationship. Well, the isolation is slow. So slow you don't notice it happening. You start declining invitations because your partner seems sad when you go out. You stop confiding in friends because your partner has convinced you they'll judge or interfere. You give up hobbies because your partner needs your attention. Each individual sacrifice feels small, feels loving even. But the cumulative effect is that your entire life becomes centered on one person, and that person now has complete control over your reality. The reason this connects to Rebecca's situation is more subtle. James and Emma were isolated from consequences by their compartmentalization. They'd created an us-against-the-world bubble in their affair where normal morals didn't apply, where Rebecca and Marcus were outside entities that existed separately, where they convinced each other that what they were doing was okay because their connection was special. That's isolation turned inward, creating a private moral universe where betrayal could be reframed as love. The test is simple. Are you maintaining healthy connections outside your primary relationship? Are you allowed to have private thoughts, private friendships, private interests? Does your partner encourage your independence or subtly undermine it? Do you feel free to do things without them or guilty? If guilt is your primary emotion when you assert independence, you're being controlled. Love doesn't require isolation. Love doesn't feel threatened by your other relationships. Love doesn't demand you abandon parts of yourself to prove your commitment. Action. Actively maintain boundaries around your independent identity. Have friends your partner doesn't monopolize. Have hobbies your partner doesn't colonize. Have thoughts you don't immediately share. You should be a whole person who chooses to partner with another whole person, not two half-people merged into codependent oneness. If your partner reacts badly to your independence, that reaction is data. It's telling you they want control more than they want your happiness. Listen to that. Flag number 5. The deadly escalation that marks the point of no return. This is the flag that appears right before everything collapses. In Rebecca's story, it was the text messages that became more frequent, more intimate, more reckless. James and Emma went from careful discretion to texting constantly, to sending heart emojis at 6 a.m., to planning their next encounter while sitting in the same room as their spouses. That escalation, that increasing boldness and carelessness, that's the death spiral. It means the compartmentalization is breaking down, but instead of stopping, they're accelerating. It means the affair has become more important than the marriage. It means they've chosen each other and are just waiting for circumstances to catch up to their decision. The deadly escalation flag shows up differently in different types of relationships. In financial betrayal, it's when small secret purchases become large secret debts. In emotional abuse, it's when occasional criticism becomes constant belittling. In control dynamics, it's when monitoring becomes surveillance. The common thread is acceleration toward an inevitable breaking point. The behavior that was hidden or occasional becomes overt or constant. Boundaries that were tested get obliterated. Risk-taking increases because the person has mentally already left the relationship. They're just physically still present. The test: look at the trajectory over time. Is the concerning behavior decreasing or increasing? Getting better or getting worse? If every conversation about the issue leads to temporary improvement followed by eventual regression to an even worse state, you're watching escalation. If apologies become more frequent but less meaningful, if promises are made and broken with increasing casualness, if the time between incidents gets shorter while the severity gets worse, you're in the death spiral. Action. When you recognize the deadly escalation flag, you're at decision time. This is the moment where you either enforce radical consequences that force change, or you exit the relationship entirely. There is no third option. Escalation doesn't stop on its own. It doesn't plateau. It continues until something breaks, either the relationship ends or someone gets seriously hurt. Your choice is whether to control the ending or let the escalation control it. If you see this flag, ask yourself, what would need to change for me to feel safe and respected? Be specific. Then communicate that clearly with a timeline. If the change doesn't happen or doesn't stick, you have your answer. The relationship is already over. You're just deciding how much more damage to absorb before you acknowledge it. So there they are. 5 red flags that predict disaster with mathematical certainty. The emotional affair beginning masked as friendship. The boundary violations that train you to doubt your instincts. The reality distortion that makes you feel crazy. The isolation that gives them control. The deadly escalation that marks the point of no return. Rebecca saw some of these flags and explained them away. You might be seeing them in your own life right now. The question is what you'll do with that information. Will you rationalize like Rebecca did? Will you wait for the pearl earring moment? The undeniable evidence that forces you to confront what you already know? Or will you trust your instincts now, recognize the pattern, and protect yourself before your life becomes a cautionary tale? Because here's the thing, Rebecca's story, as painful as it is, serves a purpose. It shows you what happens when you ignore the flags, when you choose trust over suspicion until trust becomes delusion, when you prioritize keeping the peace over enforcing your boundaries, when you believe the best about people who are showing you their worst. Rebecca couldn't have predicted the exact form her betrayal would take. But if she'd acted on the early flags, if she'd confronted the emotional affair when it was still just texting, if she'd demanded transparency when she first felt uneasy, the story might have ended differently. Maybe the affair would have stopped. Maybe the marriage would have ended sooner, with less damage. Maybe Emma would have chosen her sister over her attraction to James. We can't know, but we know that ignoring the flags led to 8 months of compounding betrayal and a revenge arc that crossed ethical lines and destroyed a family. You have the information now. You have the vocabulary to explain what you're seeing. You can name the psychological weapons being used. You can identify the red flags before they multiply. The question is whether you'll use this knowledge, whether you'll trust yourself enough to act on it, whether you'll prioritize your safety over your comfort, whether you'll be willing to confront hard truths early before they become catastrophic truths later. And that brings us back to the original question, the one you've been deliberating this whole time. Who was wrong in Rebecca's story? Obviously, James and Emma were wrong for the affair. That's not debatable. But was Rebecca wrong for her response? Wrong to lock them in the storage room? Wrong to systematically expose them to everyone they knew? Wrong to pursue revenge with such calculated intensity? Or was she entitled to every bit of justice she extracted? Was her trauma response understandable enough to excuse the methods? Is there a proportionality to betrayal and consequence that Rebecca honored or violated? You have all the facts now. You have the psychological context. You have the red flags that could have prevented this entire catastrophe if anyone had recognized and acted on them. You have Rebecca's perspective as the wronged wife, Emma and James's perspective as the guilty parties who created collateral damage in pursuit of their happiness, Marcus's perspective as the collateral damage who'd done nothing wrong but suffered anyway. You've seen how toxic psychology creates these disasters. You've seen how trauma responses create new traumas. You've seen how everyone involved made terrible choices from places of damage and distortion and desperation. Now you deliberate, you weigh the evidence, you consider the red flags that were missed and the consequences that followed. You think about whether understanding the psychology changes the moral math. You decide if Rebecca was a victim fighting back or a victimizer creating new victims. You decide if James and Emma's destroyed lives were justice or overkill. You decide where the line is between acceptable revenge and unacceptable cruelty. You decide what you would have done in Rebecca's position, knowing what you know now about betrayal and trauma and the machinery of human psychology. The gavel is in your hand. The case has been presented in full. Every fact, every complication, every grey area laid bare. No detail omitted, no perspective ignored. You know everything you need to know to render a verdict. So what is it? Who was wrong? Was anyone fully right? Is this a story of justified revenge or a cautionary tale about becoming what you hate? Is Rebecca a hero or a villain or something more complicated than either label can capture? Is there space for sympathy for everyone involved, or does someone deserve condemnation without qualification? That's for you to decide. That's why you're here. That's why this story exists. Not to give you answers, but to force you to think through the complexity of betrayal and revenge and trauma and justice. To make you confront what you believe about proportional response and acceptable boundaries and human psychology under extreme stress. I am handing you the gavel. The verdict is entirely yours. I won't tell you what to think. I won't guide you toward one conclusion or another. I'll just leave you with this. Whatever you decide, sit with the discomfort of your decision. If you decide Rebecca was justified, confront what that means about your own capacity for revenge and whether that scares you. If you decide she went too far, confront what you would have done differently and whether you're being honest about your own limits under similar pressure. If you decide everyone was wrong in different ways, confront the complexity of moral judgment in situations where everyone has legitimate grievances and everyone caused harm. This story doesn't have clean answers. It has complicated humans making terrible choices under terrible circumstances. It has betrayal and trauma and revenge and consequence. It has love twisted into hate and trust shattered into suspicion. It has a family destroyed by people who claim to love each other. And now it has you sitting in judgment, trying to determine who bears the most blame for a catastrophe that never should have happened, but did. Court is adjourned. The case is closed. The verdict is pending. I'll see you in the comments where you'll inevitably disagree with each other about whose side to take. And that disagreement is the entire point, because life is messy. Betrayal is complicated, revenge is seductive, justice is subjective, and you, the jury, have to figure out where truth lives in all that chaos. Good luck.